Hello, and welcome to another episode of Panel on Panels, the podcast about all things comics and comics related. I'm your host, John Campbell. Joining me, as always, my co-host, Mike Rigoni.
Greetings.
And Mr. Dominic Eilert.
Hi, everybody. How's it going?
Leave a little time to answer there, as per usual.
Yeah.
It's
good to catch up in the 4 seconds that we allow. Mm-hmm. If your life's more complicated,
talk
write
quick.
us panelonpanels@gmail.com.
That's right.
So let us have
Email us what's going on
Yeah.
in your day. Well, someone will read it.
We want to be like that scene in Doc Hollywood where he's reading all the letters, from the illiterate family.
Really?
If I could be any more
Doc
like Michael J.
Hollywood.
Fox, I would.
Fair enough. We are once again very excited to have a guest on the show. Somebody we've been wanting to have on for a while, actually. Please welcome to the show, Christopher Sebela.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good.
Good.
Thanks for having me.
What's new and exciting?
It's a great question.
I like to ask good ones.
Yeah, I don't know. Just the daily grind of juggling a million different things. And
Yeah.
Wondering when I'm going to sleep.
Sure. That's for when you're dead, right?
That's what I hear.
No, I like to squeeze in a good 4 hours.
Okay. It's very greedy.
But where that 4 hours comes is always a mystery.
Sure.
Well, it keeps things fresh, I guess.
Yeah.
Chris, you're a comic book writer.
Mm-hmm.
People might be familiar with some of your work. We recently had Ibrahim Mustafa on the show, who you did a great book, High Crimes, with. But we always sort of are, being a comic book podcast, are very fascinated by people's origin stories, of course. And the first question I always like to ask is, do you remember what the first comic that really clicked you into the medium was that you read?
Yeah, I think it was New Universe, like any of the New Universe books. I think it was the fact that there were all these books that I didn't need to know 20 years of history about, and I tried mightily, but trying to figure out what led the X-Men to the point where Dark Phoenix it was just like a boggling mystery, especially when you have no money as a kid. Like,
Right.
It's like I can only buy like 4 things, and I'm not going to waste it on backstory. So New Universe was like the first time that like I was like, oh, everything is like starting point. Like I could just follow it from here, and like, and probably of all those, like DP7, which is short for Displaced Paranormals.
Yeah.
7, because there were 7 of them.
Yeah.
Because I love like books with like a ragtag team sort of thrown together by circumstance, and that kind of hit all those buttons for
Oh,
me.
sure, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think that was the first time I was like really like, oh, okay, I get comics, like, and I get what's so exciting about them.
Well, I feel like in DP7 there were some pretty heavy messages about displacement and maybe even some sexuality stuff in there and all kinds of stuff.
I don't think there was anything deep in that. Like, I've gone back and done a reread as recently as like the last 5 years or so, and you should not do that.
Because that can always be a little rough sometimes when it comes to these comics.
Like, the concept I think is still mostly steady, but the execution is just like, it's very, I don't know. Some comics you go back and read, and you're like, oh, this was clearly written in the late '80s. Like,
Yeah.
whereas other books, can feel sort of timeless, but that one very much feels like, yep, this is the '80s.
I still keep trying to reread Dark Knight Strikes Again, just like, this was made. How was this made?
Yeah, I've never gotten to the end of that.
It's tough. You really need some commitment to do that because it gets rough. And then did that sort of then spark just devouring anything you get your hands on? Or?
For a while, yeah. I've had a on-again, off-again relationship with comics, so I like that first time I dove in deep, and like the like allowance money that I would make I used to go to the arcade and basically like give me $10 of quarters and I'm just going to waste the day. Like then I started being like, oh, I can use this to buy comics. So
Right.
I pretty much made the switch over, and then I collected comics for a good, I think basically until I got into high school. And then I was like, I'm never going to get laid if I keep these around. Because that was like, I don't know, that was like, late 80s, early 90s. So like nerds weren't cool back then.
Right.
Yeah.
It was very much like
The popular misconception is that they're cool now.
Hey, we're very
I
cool.
think they are because like we're now like hitting this point where like it's weird. Like I remember watching Revenge of the Nerds as a kid, and like the roles have totally like if you made Revenge of the Nerds now, it would be Revenge of the Jocks, like because of the fact that like it just feels like the roles have been so swapped.
Oh, for sure.
Are you going to write that?
But-
Do you think Revenge of the Jocks?
If they call me, yeah.
Okay, cool.
But then, yeah, I have not been inside a place of high school learning in quite a while, so I could just be talking out my ass.
Yeah.
So yeah, then I ditched them around high school, and then I remember, but I still kept them all, like, and I would go back and read some, and I think I still picked up like trades occasionally, and then I was done with them pretty much till I was almost out of college, and I had a friend who lived with me. We lived together in a studio apartment in Chicago. So, like, not a lot of boundaries or anything. He was really into comics, so he left, he brought them home and left them sitting around. And then I was like, oh, wait, I remember. I like comics. Like, so, yeah, then I dived back in, and then I was pretty deep into it. Then I quit one more time. And then I came back, and then when I came back was sort of around the time I was like, well, I would like to, like, maybe try writing these. So.
And was writing always something you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, I mean, it's the only thing I've ever really felt like I could do well, like just innately. I got my degree in psychology, and then was like, I don't want to spend my life listening to people like explain their problems. Like I have enough of my, and I think the stereotype is true that like people who go into like psychology fields like are clearly there's something broken inside themselves, and they're like, I'll just skip that. I'm gonna focus on other people's problems, like, and maybe if I hear enough of their problems, then it'll trigger some sort of catharsis, and I'll break through myself. But yeah, writing was really all I ever really deep down wanted to do. I definitely got distracted a lot along the way, and I didn't really start actively pursuing it until I moved to Portland. So
And when you actively started pursuing it, was it specifically in comics?
yeah, so I lived in Kansas City, and I'd been freelancing for about 4 years doing graphic design stuff, and then that was right around the time where the economy started to collapse, and suddenly everybody was moving all their stuff in-house, and I could see the writing on the wall, and I was like, well, I'm screwed. Like, I'm not a good enough graphic designer to make a living at this. Like, if I have to go out and hustle for work, like, nobody's going to hire me. So I was like, well, I'm just going to take, like, the money I have saved up, and I'm going to move to Portland. And because I knew, Dark Horse is here and Oni Press is here. So that's two companies, and I know there's a bunch of comics people there. And like Matt and Kelly Sue had just moved out here, and they offered me, they were like, you can come, we have a spare room you can come stay at while you get set up. So I was like, well, like either I do this or I stay in Kansas City, go broke, and then have to get a job, working at a Quick Trip or something equally awful. So
Yeah. Can't avoid that at all costs.
yeah.
Gorgoni can tell you about that, having worked.
Yeah, 6 years at 7-Eleven. Woo!
I'm sure you have some amazingly messed up stories.
There are some amazingly messed up stories.
It's amazing.
That's a different podcast.
It's amazing that you left at the graveyard shift part of it, because I feel like that
Oh.
just kind of compounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, there were a bunch of crazy people out on the street, and I just happened to be the craziest one that was trapped in a store.
Yeah, exactly.
So something I'm always fascinated by with this is pursuing work as a writer in comics is obviously a lot different than, we talked to a lot of artists on the show who,
Yeah.
I went around and showed my portfolio and stuff. Where do you even begin when you start out as a writer?
Yeah, I feel like I had a weird path in because so, I mean, basically the very first gig I ever did in comics was this thing. It was a book that went nowhere that we did back in like 2004, I think. My buddy Charlie sort of organized this anthology, and it was me, Sam Humphries, Kieran Gillen, and like a couple other people. Who
Well, that was a pretty good crowd right there.
Yeah, but like that's back when they weren't huge names,
right?
Like so, and then we all came up with stories and we got artists, and then Charlie tried to go around and sort of get a publisher interested, and every publisher was like, we don't care about anthologies. And then I just kind of like put that in a shelf or in a drawer. And then when I moved out here, Charlie moved out here because he had gotten a gig as an editor at Oni. And we were actually moving in together because we both moved here at the same time. So I was like, well, why don't we just be roommates? Like, because neither of us knows what the hell we're doing in Portland. So, but yeah, and he was, he encouraged me to. He's like, you should pitch us stuff. So I started pitching them ideas, and all of them were way too ambitious, way too big. Like,
sure,
it's the rookie mistake.
Yeah, we've heard that from people before. Let me pitch you my 12-volume epic.
Yeah,
I've got an opus I want to sell you on.
I mean, my favorite one was that I pitched them was it was like a 12-issue maxi series, like and it was like a whole trip cross country, and like it's just like really deep, and of course they said no, and I'm still trying to break that story. Like I think I'm a little bit closer now, but back then, like I definitely realized I was like, well, one, I'm not ready to tell this story, and two, like nobody knows who the fuck I am. So
right. So maybe start on something a little bit smaller.
Yeah. So then, I was just pitching them, and they liked the pitches, but it just like wasn't, nobody knew who I was. So then Charlie, asked me. He's like, we have this. Because basically, like, they're in-house sort of generating ideas and throwing stuff against the wall, see what sticks. And Charlie, like, floated an idea by me. And he's like, do you think you could make anything out of that? And I was like, well, I could certainly try. So I went away and, like, worked on a pitch for it. And it, took 6 months. And they said yes, weirdly enough. And it was the same week that my first book to come out, Screamland, I had started working with my friend Harold, who had written the first volume of Screamland. And I was like, well, I don't know how to get into comics, and you've already done a comic, so like maybe we can team up and like work together and write together. So we did, and then so we sold Screamland, and then like 2 days later, the book to Oni got sold. So then suddenly I was like, oh crap, I just sold 2 books and now I have to write them. So yeah, I feel like that's why I suck with giving people advice on how to break in. Also, I mean, I spent a long amount of time on the Warren Ellis forum back in the very late 90s, early 2000s. So I feel like I had done all my networking back then. That's back when I met Sam and Kieran and Charlie and
wasn't Fraction on that as well? Yeah.
But Matt I had known since college.
So, oh wow.
Did you go to college together?
No, he came to Chicago to go to Columbia College for filmmaking. So he was in Chicago for like a year, which is when I met him, and then we just kind of kept in touch. But yeah, so I feel like I did the really hard part, which is like getting people to know who you are and to care about you, and like I had already done that. So then it was just a matter of like proving that if anybody had the remotest bit of faith in me, that it was justified. So. So yeah, but then like I sold those 2 books, and then it was that was like in 2010, and then it was like a drought until 2013 when High Crimes finally came out.
And High Crimes obviously kind of was a digital comic.
Yeah.
And how did that idea generate? Was that something that you like? I want to do this mystery on Mount Everest, or
yeah, basically like I had like the year before I moved to Portland, I'd gotten into this huge crime book kick, and I went out and bought a bookshelf, and then I set forth to fill that bookshelf.
That's the best feeling in the world.
Yeah, it was great. It was like just a small black bookshelf, and I was like, I'm just going to buy crime books until I fill it up, and I'm going to read them all.
What kind of stuff? What were you reading?
All sorts of, I'd go back and read, like Dashiell Hammett.
Sure.
And then like modern stuff like Walter Mosley, just like any
very nice.
sort of, because I don't know, me personally, like I think one of the breakthroughs to me sort of embracing comics was, for a long time as a writer, I had this really uppity notion that like, no, I have to write a book that matters. Like, and I've written a lot of prose, but I was always very much like, no, this has to be an important book. Like poo-poo genre, like who cares about that? And then I had to learn to let go of that. Like, and it hung on me forever. Like this sort of like self-imposed prison I locked myself into. So like buying all the crime books was a way of like, because I love crime stuff in movies and stuff. So I just started like reading all those, and then I moved out here, and it was like, well, there's not a lot of crime, except for outside of like Brubaker and Phillips. Wasn't a ton of crime stuff going on, so I thought like, well, that's what I want to do, like more than like superheroes or anything else. Like I want to do a crime book, and I had thought about high crime. I've been obsessed with Everest for a while now, and I remember back in my apartment in Kansas City, I remember like having the idea. I think I was watching a documentary on Everest and having the idea of like, well, what if somebody brought a gun to the Khumbu Icefall? And then that just sort of planted the seed, and then then I started developing it, and I made the rookie mistake. Like I made it huge. Like there were, I think like initially 3 teams showed up. There was like a squad of Russians, a squad of Chinese, and like a squad of American spies, and it was just like, and yeah, like then I'm learning to scrap all that, and like, no, I have to like make a book about a person. Like I can't like.
Can't just be G.I. Joe on
Everest. You can do it in comics doesn't mean you should.
Right.
Though, John, now that you say G.I. Joe on Everest.
I'm pretty sure that book exists somewhere, and Snow Job's in it for sure.
But yeah, like, so it was just, that was the book, and that was kind of, I had pitched it to a publisher, and they said no, because it was too close to another book they had already put out. So it's just this thing that, like, and I had this thing, and I was like, this is great, like, and nobody will let me do it. And then Chris Robertson and Allison Baker, like, right when they moved to town, I started hanging out with them, and that's right when they were starting Monkey Brain. So I remember they asked me, it was like at somebody's birthday party, actually. Like, I remember Allison screaming in my ear, like, we want you to do a book with us. And I was like, okay. And I knew, like, well, that's the book I want to do. And they were pretty open to being like, do whatever idea you want to do most, to, like, the one thing. And that was my thing. And I was kind of at a point, before that happened, really up until the book came out, where, like, High Crimes was sort of my last stab at comics. Like, so I was just, like, making no progress. And, for money, I was flatting comics, which is the worst job in comics you could do, especially if you're like looking to break into anything.
Right.
So yeah, I was just like, well, I believe in this book, and like hopefully somebody will read it, and then luckily the right people read it. So.
And then how did you and Ibrahim hook up then?
Through Joe Keating.
Okay.
He was in a studio with Ibrahim, and it was I get very obsessed with like chains of circumstance, like things of where like if you didn't do this one thing, this thing,
right?
And that was very much a case with meeting Ibrahim. Was it was like the night before my birthday, and I just got the idea of like I want to go to that make your own pancake place.
Yeah, Slappy Cakes.
Slappy Cakes, yeah.
There's a place called Slappy
Been there
Cakes.
many a time.
It's the Benihana of pancakes.
Fair enough. I can't.
And you get to be the hibachi chef of pancakes.
Yeah.
It's
awesome.
worth
a visit.
Fair
Also,
enough.
they have chicken fried
yeah.
bacon.
Yes,
Oh,
they
wow.
do.
You
And
just
it's-
sold Gorgoni big time.
Yeah, you did.
Like you could just go and get the chicken fried bacon and
Yep.
walk out and be a very happy person.
Yeah.
You could just smell it and probably be a pretty happy person.
Yeah.
You'll float like a cartoon on the walks of the set. Yeah.
So yeah, I remember like texting Joe and being like, "Do you want to go get Slappy Cakes tomorrow?" And luckily he said yes. And then after breakfast, I was driving him back to his studio, and we were talking about the Monkey Brain stuff. I was like, yeah, I gotta find an artist. I don't know how to find an artist for this. And he's like, I'm in a studio with this guy Ibrahim, and he's been looking for a new project. And I think and Joe foolishly had a policy in place that he wasn't going to work with anybody he was in a studio with, which makes sense. Like in terms of like you don't want to, especially if like a project starts going sideways.
Don't poop where you eat.
Yeah, but when you've got somebody like Ibrahim sitting around, I mean...
Yeah, exactly. But, Joe, it was like an across-the-board policy. Like, no, I'm setting this line in the sand. I don't care how tempting whatever's on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, I can respect
God,
that.
Yeah, because if he didn't have that policy, then I never would have... But, yeah, so he took me and I met Ibrahim and basically pitched him while he was drawing. And, like, later that day, he wrote me back and was like, yeah, I want to do it. So it was... Yeah, and like if I had changed one little thing, I never would have met him, and like I would not be recording this podcast right
There you
now,
go.
So.
All roads lead back to Panel on Panels.
That was the moral. That can be a dangerous rabbit hole, though. Those like cascading circumstances.
Oh,
if
yeah.
you, like this has happened to me more than once. Just like nights where I'm just like, and if this had happened, and this has happened, and this has happened, and my life would be completely different right now.
Yeah. That's one of the things I get fixated on. And it's just, there was that movie. I know everybody hates that Fincher movie, Benjamin Button.
Oh, yeah.
But I love that movie specifically because it has a sequence that is all about when it's all about how she gets hit by the car, and it goes back through and every little thing. Like if she hadn't left the house 5 minutes late, and blah blah blah, and it was like, well, I don't care what happens in this movie. Like this is the shit that goes through my head. Like,
Yeah.
John, what's that one movie where it's like the woman gets to the door and she has to choose the left door or the right door, and like the movie happens on two separate tracks?
Sliding Doors?
Sliding Doors. There we go.
Yeah.
That movie's nuts.
The movie's nuts. It's like a romantic comedy, but it feels like a sci-fi movie.
Right.
It's really, you're like, what's going on here? This is a very, very strange film. And then, as you sort of we're approaching the digital format, was there a different approach to that than how you were normally working on stuff?
No, we decided pretty early that we just wanted, like, because we knew it would be coming out in print, and we knew that like Monkey Brain was getting a lot of buzz, but we knew that like digital comics are still for a lot of people just a no-go. So at the time, like people were very excited about digital comics, and like definitely like Mark Waid's like Thrillbent thing was doing a lot of very specific format stuff with it, but we were just like we don't want to like do a trick, and then like how do you recreate that in print? So we just did it as standard comics.
And then was it always the format of it? Was that ever like how many issues it was going to be, or?
Yeah, I guess I have a fixation with 12. Like 12 is sort of my Magic Comics number. So right from the gate, I was like 12.
I think that's fairly common. Or and there's a lot of
for like
of,
graphic novels. I feel like that is. I feel like it's a common number in terms of just like you get 12 issues. That's like 2 full runs, kind of 6 and 6. I don't know.
Issue a month.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because I grew up on stuff like Secret Wars and stuff,
right?
Like, and it's like 12 issues, like ooh, like so. It was
right.
Like I think that just lodged in my consciousness, and now I don't think a book is good enough unless it has 12 issues.
You won't read it unless.
No, I will.
Okay.
But writing it is I'm very much like, no, I need 12 issues to do this.
Cool.
Like, which is problematic because I'm sure there are some things that I don't need 12 issues to do.
Yeah.
I'm learning. I'm doing a mini that's only 5 issues, and I'm doing something that's going to be 15 issues. So I'm trying to very, very slowly work outside of
and then, like, so when you pitched the book, you said it was sort of much broader in scope initially. How did you narrow it down to being about? How did you sort of find that protagonist of that book?
I mean, a really useful thing was because I was living. Charlie and I were still living together as roommates, and I was sort of because I had run it by him. So I was like, "You're an editor. Like, tell me if this is garbage." And that was one of his major notes, was how big it was. But he gave me a copy of Underground, the book by Jeff Parker and Steve Lieber.
Right.
Which is all about caving.
Yeah.
So it's the diametric opposite. But he was like, take a look at this. Like, this is very much like it's there are parts of it that are very epic, but it's very much a small story. And that was really a big breakthrough for me. Reading that was like, oh, you can do a thing that's like like, you don't need, you don't need a cast of like 100 people, and you don't need, to depict like mass chaos. Like, you can do all this stuff on a much smaller scale. So that was probably the most helpful in me, sort of like, okay, I have to tear High Crimes down and rebuild it into what it became. I mean, I'm glad I did all the wacky stuff because I came up with some good stuff in there. But also, like, I don't know, it takes me a while to sort of work through. Like, it wasn't until I think we were 3 or 4 issues in that I finally ditched my proposed, or my original proposed ending for High Crimes was like Zan getting to the summit, and then a helicopter rises up above the summit.
Flight of the Valkyries playing.
Basically, yeah. And it's just like, and like I still hit that sort of same beat, but yeah, it was just like, no, this is not. Once I started like doing it, then I realized what a different kind of book it was. I think in the pitching stage, like, you always get everything's so ethereal. It's just like you don't know what the book is until you start writing it. Like, you can plan, to forever and just lose yourself in like trying to work it out, but it's not until you actually like start working on it and you're like, oh, okay, like now I understand.
I found that's true even when you're like outlining stuff. You have all these grand ideas for something, and at that point, it's just like bullet points on a page. It's not until you're into the nitty gritty of just like writing these characters' dialogue, writing the story, that you figure out like, okay, here's like where it is, and here's where I can focus and stuff.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and it's yeah, I tend to get lost in note taking, so I'm trying to get better about that. But like, but yeah, just like, because until you start writing it, like, everything is, you could still go a million different directions. I think it's just about committing to something, and just like, even if you see it through the end and it's like, oh, well, that stunk. Like, at least you did it and you realize now that won't work. Like, and you screwed yourself. But I tried to learn from my mistakes. I don't know if I'm that successful at it yet, though.
And then with High Crimes, was it always going to be this kind of parallel narrative to a certain extent? When you've got Zahn going up the mountain, but you keep doing these flashbacks through the journal of the spy character.
Yeah, it was always sort of proposed like that. Sort of. It wasn't until I was writing the second issue of High Crimes that I realized, like, I never outlined his story. Like, I literally all it said, like, in my outline was like, Morris's journal, like this page and the next page. I was like, what did you do? Like, you just got lazy, and you were just like, nah, I'll figure that out at some point.
That's a problem for future me.
Yeah, I have a term for it. I call it loopering. Yeah. When past you is just like, screw it, I'll leave it to future me. Like,
this is Bruce Willis's problem.
Exactly, yeah. So many times I looper myself. On the rare occasion, it's a good thing where I'm like, hey, way to go, past me. Like, you went and you outlined this page by page. Like,
so rarely do we pat past me on the back.
Yeah. Past me is always screwing present and future me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but in retrospect, like, that worked out pretty well for me because it left me, I planned out the Everest stuff, like, I felt fairly exactingly that, like, having a couple pages an issue or every other issue was like, oh, okay, well, this is like a present to myself. Like, this is the thing that I haven't worked to death, that it's still, like, I can do whatever with these 2 pages or 3 pages. Like, I mean, I always knew, where it ends up because it starts with him dead on Everest.
Right.
So it's like, okay, I already got my ending sold. It's just a matter of, like, what happens to him as he goes up or before he even goes there.
Yeah.
For sure, yeah. And one of the interesting things I think about that book is because of this Everest setting, there's this really interesting pacing in that it's a chase story but the chase purposely has to be very slow. Like, you're going up this mountain, and like, I mean, reading it's so interesting to be like, oh, they're like camping, and the bad guys are right there.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like that. It's just so. I mean, and I think did that come out of that Everest research that you?
Yeah, because that was like, I remember one of my earliest notes is like, how do you do a thriller on Everest? Like, because like, even if you're booking it, like, you're still like, you're going to get caught in a line behind people, and it's just like you can't. It's not a speed thing. Like there are people who can do it very fast, like, but it's still going to be half a day or so. And that's like masterclass climbers who are crazy. So yeah, it's about trying to figure out how to. I guess you pick your battles. I don't know, like, but I felt like we had kind of established it pretty early on as very much a character piece. So,
for sure, yeah.
So I felt like, I was like, oh, well, nothing really sort of happens in this issue. And I was like, well, like, if you give a crap about the character, which hopefully you do at this point, like, then which is very helpful, like, because when you grow up reading superhero comics, it's very much about, like, what amazing thing is going to happen in this issue that justifies me, spending money on it. So, yeah, like, that was helpful in, like, I don't need a big brash thing to happen as long as, like, something is happening between people that, can hold somebody's interest.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And that book, pretty successful from what I gather. I mean, I remember hearing about it when because I knew Ibrahim a little bit and him telling me about it, and like, oh, this looks cool, and then checking it out, and then suddenly like, oh, wow, and then eventually Dark Horse published this really awesome hardcover of it. How quickly did you see that people were clicking with it?
Kind of right from the first issue. I was actually I was at this 24-hour coffee shop in Beaverton that I work at a lot, and I was there the morning it came out because I was frantically like finishing lettering on issue 2 because it was due the same day that issue 1 came out. So I remember sitting there. It was like 5 in the morning, and like the people who had actually slept all night and were now coming in for their morning coffee are coming in. And I'm just like,
I despise those people.
they're the worst. But
again,
just, like,
5 years graveyard shift.
Yeah.
I'm just sitting there like a zombie, just like I gotta finish lettering this, like, and I can't, like, and I knew it was coming out, so I was like, I just gotta focus, like, stop checking Twitter, like, stop refreshing the Comixology page, and then I just started getting notices on my phone, and I think the first one that like really did it was Gabe Hardman tweeted about it. And I was like, holy shit. Like,
Gabe Hardman,
yeah. I was like, what is he doing reading our book? Because he's not friends with either of us, and I've never met the dude. So that was the first time I was like, oh, it's not just like people I know who are reading this. Like, it's, people whose stuff I've seen before and who I respect. Like, yeah, that first day was just like a weird fever dream.
That's got to be a wild feeling.
Yeah, and it was like, so I think I left the coffee shop at like 7 or 8 in the morning, and I had gotten there probably, around midnight or something. So I'm like flying high on caffeine, but also like have not slept in over a day, and just like, yeah, it's just one of those moments where it's like it feels like a weird dream or something, like, or just like a delusion, and I'm just like. I keep referring back to it, but like working on High Crimes 1 and 2, I did a lot of work on that on this train trip I took from here to Omaha and back, which was a nightmare. But like right after I got back is when the first issue came out, and like I was like, well, maybe I never got off the train. Like, maybe I just lost my mind on the train. And all this is just like...
We've gone Jacob's Ladder on this, and I'm dying somewhere on the train tracks.
And it's just like, this is all going too well. Like, this doesn't track for me. Like, where's the... I mean, the bumps were that we weren't getting paid that much because it was 99 cents an issue. But yeah, just like... And I think, within like... a couple weeks of that coming out, I had like gotten a call from an editor at Skybound who wanted to talk to me, and I had fortunately like made connections over at Boom, so I sent like the first issue over to Bryce at Boom, and like then he wanted to talk at like Emerald City, so it was just like right away, like the right people were reading it and responding to it. And I still don't get it, but I'll take it.
Accept the serendipity.
Yep.
For sure. And then in doing that, how quickly did you? Was this around the same time you also did some work with Marvel?
I did. I co-wrote 5 issues of Captain Marvel and 2 issues of Fantastic Four, and basically all those come down to Matt and Kelly Sue being very, very nice to me, because I did all the. I think Fantastic Four, actually, those came out, and some of the Captain Marvel, like the first 2 Captain Marvels I co-wrote, like I had nothing going on. I was just like I was flatting comics all day and then writing all night, but like nothing was getting published. And I remember Kelly Sue asking me like, "Would you want to do this?" And I was like, "Yes." Like,
I don't know, maybe. Like,
I mean, but you say yes, and it's like, yeah, and then you're like, "Oh crap!" Like, if I screw this up, like,
right.
I'm so boned.
Especially because that book like hit and was hot instantly.
Well, yeah, and I was like, I do not want the Carol Corps mad at me.
No.
So yeah, those were both really. Well, like the first Captain Marvel thing I did, it was just a standalone 2-issue thing. I had a lot of fun doing that one. The second one was more of it was like the lead up to the Enemy Within arc. So it was a lot of like, they had already established pieces that needed to be in this certain place by the time these 5 issues or 4 issues ended. So that one was, I wouldn't say it was as much fun as the first one, but it was fun from a different perspective in that, like, I got to see like how it works behind the scenes, like how Marvel like works out all the math on crossovers and stuff.
Right.
And then the Fantastic Four one was like, that was a weird experience all in all. Like, because I pitched the idea to Matt about, I had an idea like walking through the woods one day when I was, had this idea about like terrorists, or I was listening to the Kinks' Village Green Preservation Society.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, what if they were terrorists? Like, what if they were really serious about preserving the past? And I just had that idea, and then Matt was like, do you want to do Fantastic Four? And then I was like, oh, well, like, we can have terrorists who have, like, weaponized time machines and are, like, replacing new buildings with their older counterparts. So
That's tailor-made for the Fantastic Four, pretty much.
Yeah, and I got to work with Mark Bagley, who, you know,
nice.
Drew, like, you know, some of the most, like, pivotal books for me growing up. So, yeah, it was...
What was that like? I mean, to come into that and realize, like, this is somebody I've been reading forever.
It was super strange. Like, yeah, I mean, and a lot of that was done through editors, so it's not like I really, like, got chummy with Bagley, but, you know, yeah, just the... I always find it weird, like, even if it's an artist nobody's heard of, that, like, you know, you're writing things down, and then, like, a week or a day or two later, like, somebody has taken that and interpreted it as a page of comic. Like, that's still, like... And when it's Mark Bagley, it's just like, oh, you drew Strike Force Mortuae. Like, yeah, like, 10-year-old me would be freaking out right now.
I'm mostly curious about how co-writing a comic book is even accomplished, because I work with a writing partner quite a bit, and, like, I know how our process works, but, like, how do you go about... Is it co-plotting? Is it just bouncing ideas off of each other?
For the Captain Marvel stuff, it was... so, like, the first 2-issue thing I did was Captain Marvel and Monica Rambeau.
I was about to bring that up, yeah.
In New Orleans, like, and I knew there was, like, a giant metal robot. And that was sort of, like, what I was... Like, I think there were a few more details, but basically, I was like, okay, like, let's make a story with this. So... the way it worked with Kelly Sue is basically I was hired to do breakdowns. So I would go through and basically write out what happens in every panel. But I can't write a comic like that, so I wrote dialogue too. And I told Kelly Sue, I was like, you can just chuck all this, but like I need to do it in order to be able to write. So. So I would write the first, like, we would sit around and, like, note card everything, like, this happens on these pages and so on and so forth. And then once we felt good about it, I would go away and write the first draft. I would give it to her, and then she would make it really good. And then it would, you know, get bounced back. Like, editors would give some notes. And I think Kelly Sue mostly handled those. I would say, like, on... all the Captain Marvel stuff, it was, you know, like 80% Kelly Sue and 20% me.
I'll give yourself some credit if you're bringing back Monica Rambeau. I mean,
well, yeah, I didn't do that. Like, I just showed up and she was there.
no, fair enough.
But it was kind of cool because we were like trying to figure out what to do with it. And I remember being at the coffee shop at like 2 a.m. and going through Monica Rambeau's like Marvel wiki, just like looking for something that like we could use. And I remember like coming on this thing where like, oh, and then there was this point where she got like drained by some sort of villain and got turned into an old lady for a while.
Like you do.
Yeah, because she was in the water and it like used her as a conductor and stuff. And I was like, well, what if we like mention that like as a reason that like Monica's afraid to go in the water, and everybody was into that. And, and I also like reading through her power set, it was like, oh well, she can she's like, I don't know. I figured out some way of her power set that's like, oh well, what if like that means she could like occupy someone else's body? So like, what if she and Carol like shared bodies in order to like finally overcome the enemy? And everybody loved that, and I was just like, this is like, it's really weird like playing with these sort of established toys and like finding out something that like even the editor is like, oh, that's super cool, like sort of that deep nerd stuff that like really feels satisfying to like.
Yeah, and that's interesting because that is like, this is conversations you have sitting around with other comic book fans of what if this happened and that happened?
Yeah.
But now you say that and people at Marvel are like, that's going to happen.
Run with it, yeah. So yeah, I mean, and then I don't know, other bits of co-writing I've done. Like when I was co-writing with Harold, that was we'd have like long, intense discussions about what's going to happen in this, and then we just sort of like bounce stuff, and like I think we'd swap out where I would do a first draft on one issue, and then he'd do a first draft on the next issue, or we'd split an issue up. Like I'll do the first 7 pages, and then you do the next 7, and. So it's just about getting comfortable enough that, like, you're willing to, whoever you're working with, that you're willing to let them tear your stuff apart, all for the greater good.
I feel like that's true with any writing, like being able to accept editorial criticism.
Yeah. I mean, editorial stuff is a little easier. Like, I think it's definitely, things get hinky when you're co-writing.
Yeah.
Because it's very much, everybody has, there's only, like, I think it's pretty rare to be like completely unified in a vision for a thing. So like, everybody's having to make compromises, and somebody's feelings are going to get hurt, or somebody's just going to like check out at some point, or it's so yeah. I mean, and it's like I'm grateful for. I mean, I wouldn't be. I think as whatever level of good I'm at now, I wouldn't be that good if I hadn't done all the co-writing, but I really like writing by myself now. It's a very small sort of like fiefdom, but I feel like, God, this is mine. I'm the king of this. I say what goes. Like, and then the editor will come along and go, well, maybe not that. But that stuff, unless you're doing work for hire stuff, that's pretty optional. So.
And then you were talking about working with artists, and comic scripts are always so interesting to me because everybody seems to have sort of their own take on what they should look like. I mean, there's sort of a. We talked to Jamie S. Rich about that there's sort of becoming like a general format to what they look like or feel like. But what do your scripts tend to look like? How much detail do you go into, and how much leeway do you give the artist on stuff?
I try to give the ultimate amount of leeway. Like I try to, unless it's something that's super crucial that like and even stuff like that I've learned is not as crucial as you think it is. Like if you've like pictured this shot in your head. And then you get super married to it, like, I don't know, like it's weird because that like artists invest way more time than writers do into a book, like just purely on mathematics. Like, there's no way that a writer can, unless you're a really slow writer, or you do 20 drafts. So I try to just sort of like, here's how I see it, and I always make it clear with artists from the get-go. I'm like, listen, like my scripts are like me saying how I see it, but by no means should you take that as gospel. Like,
right.
Like tear it apart. If you think something sucks, please tell me. Like, and I was lucky enough to start out with Ibrahim, and Ibrahim's amazing, and he would change stuff, and it would always be for the better. Like, and he would always call out stuff where like he's like, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I was being lazy. So yeah, I try to, I do full scripts with dialogue and everything, and usually like way too much dialogue. But yeah, I try to be as ethereal as possible because I want the artist to have fun. Like, and nobody's going to have fun if like, hey, listen, here's a map on exactly how to, it's like building an IKEA bookshelf. Like, nobody really has fun doing this.
I love building my little blog.
The first one's okay, but by the time you're on the third one, you're like, oh, Christ, I got to do this. Like, so leaving it open where it's just like, I want you to contribute as much or as little as you want. And, like it's paid off for me so far. I've never... I'll have notes sometimes, but never am I like, oh, they completely screwed the page up.
Right.
Like, it's always like, that's not at worst, it's like, wasn't a thing I was expecting, but that stuff I think is always best for a book. Like, I think getting too married to the original material is just death. Like, so if you're like, you can't treat your scripts as gospel. Like, your scripts are like, well, here's what I thought was really good at the time, and then you get a chance to go back and look over and sort of flesh out, and if things in the art happen differently, like rolling with that. And I think that, it's good to have that skill of like rebuilding on the fly, and more often than not, it leads you down some paths that you weren't even thinking about. So.
And then you worked on something that you're the first person we've had who worked on this, but that I'm very fascinated by, which is the Fire and Stone. Yes. That's sort of a crossover event across all the Alien and Predator stuff. How did you come to be involved in that?
I lobbied pretty hard for it. Like, I'm good friends with Kelly Sue, and she had been talking about doing the thing, and that they were looking for local writers. And I was like, I gotta, like, I was like, I will be your compass in the room. Like, I will tell you where you're screwing up on Xenomorph or Predator War. Like, I know this shit backwards and forwards. And luckily, like, High Crimes had just started coming out, so I was able to send that to Scott Alley, the editor, and I somehow managed to get an invite. I think it was because Scott also knew I was really into horror movies. Like, we had long discussions on Twitter about horror movies and stuff, so I think he was like, okay, well, this is my horror nerd. Like, we'll put him on a horror book. So, yeah, I was just lucky enough to be living in Portland and friends with Kelly Sue. And I had met Scott before, so, like, he was aware of who I was. But, yeah, I was just like, I got to get in that room.
And then what was that? I mean, what was that process like? Because it's these, in the individual books, but they're all interconnected, sort of. Yeah. In that way, we were talking about with Marvel to a certain extent. I mean, where was it? All of you guys coming together to sort of figure out the points of it, and
yeah, we all met like once a month, and everybody brought their notebooks, and there was a whiteboard and a master binder, and yeah, we would just like sit around and we'd like eat dinner, and then we'd just like sit and talk about like, okay, here's what we're doing, and like then we'd address each book, like what we thought should happen, and so it was like, if you're used to writing like by yourself, just quietly, headphones on, like it's a weird adjustment to make to being like, no, now you're in a room where you just shout your ideas out, and someone can tell you that sucks hard, and you have to live with it. So. Again, like, it was another thing that I think has been really educational for me. And it was, interesting to see how everybody else's brains sort of worked on that level. So I'm definitely, I don't know, I kind of like to lay back in the cut and sort of like, I'm not going to talk until I actually have, like, something solid figured out. Like, I'm not a good, like, spitballer.
Right.
More of a go home and make my spitball, and then I'll bring it back the next morning. So yeah, and then, we'd sort of figure it all out together, and then we'd all go away and write our stuff, and then we'd come back and and then like 2 issues in, we all got notes from Fox that were like, yeah, you can't do any of this, so we had to start all over.
All right. Wow.
Yeah, and that was after, I think, 2 or 3 months of working on it.
Oh, wow.
Jesus.
Yeah, so that was interesting. I was like, oh, okay, all that work we did, the first 2 scripts you wrote, like, just chuck them, like, because we got to start again.
I don't know if you're able to talk about that, but what was their concern? Or?
Because they were working. I mean, they still are, but they were like in the screenwriting stage of Prometheus 2.
Or what, Alien Covenant now? Is that what it is?
I don't know.
It's something.
Yeah.
Revengeance.
Something, yeah.
Yeah, we had to run, everything by Fox.
Sure.
And then, apparently, like, Ridley Scott's assistant looked at it on behalf of him. But, yeah, then they came back with all these notes that are like, yeah, we're thinking about doing something like this, or, like, historically, you can't have all these aliens in this period of time.
Interesting.
Yeah, so because originally we were setting all the books like right after Prometheus, and then they blew that up. So we're like, oh, screw it, we'll just do it like
Predates Weyland-Yutani discovering the Nostromo. So I'm sorry, I went a little nerd there.
I think we like shoved it past Aliens, so it took place in between Aliens and Alien 3. I think. I don't know.
I don't even know what the time gap is between those two movies. Because you get into the weird, like, cryo sleep stuff.
Yeah, that stuff always muddies the waters. So it might have been, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know anymore.
Somewhere in there. And then how did you get on Alien vs. Predator specifically? I mean, were you like, I want to do that one, or did they assign that to you? Or?
It was assigned to me.
Okay.
I kind of saw it going that way just because I know that, like, I was the sort of least qualified writer in the room. And, like, that is, as a franchise, is not... I think it's loved as a concept more than as an execution. Like, I saw both of those movies, and they were horrible.
Yes.
But,
I enjoyed Requiem.
Oh,
it was
the worst one.
It was so bonkers.
I'm so glad I'm so glad somebody else is here to challenge you about AVP Requiem.
Oh, come on. It was just like kids in the middle of the woods getting killed by alien and Oh, it's totally pointless. That's why I enjoy it.
It's a slasher movie. Instead of like, oh, well, we have aliens and predators. Why don't we like... I went back and watched like all the aliens, all the predators before I started writing it, and I watched the first AVP, and I was like, that's pretty shitty, but like at least like doing a couple cool things. And then I got to AVP 2, and like as soon as I saw it was like some small Kansas town, and I was like, nope, I'm out. I remember this. I remember how dumb that is. So
fair enough.
But yeah, every time I would talk about those movies at like a panel at a con, like, and I would say, like, oh, those movies kind of sucked. Like, everybody would be in agreement. So I know, like...
Apparently, I'm alone.
Just one guy going, I liked them.
There was a pred alien. I thought that was interesting.
That was interesting. But, yeah, so I kind of knew... I was like, well, they're not going to give me Prometheus because that's sort of the book that contains everything.
Sure.
And they're not going to give me Aliens because that's a higher profile. So I was like, I'm either going to get AVP or Predator. And, like, in that first meeting, Josh Williamson was, like, clearly very excited about the Predator. So I was like, I'm getting AVP. Which I was sort of like, because I've never really loved any of the AVP. I think I liked that first Dark Horse thing, the one that kicked it off.
Oh, yeah.
That was one of the first comics I ever collected issue to issue, actually.
I
love that book.
I think I've lost it. Maybe it's somewhere in a box. But I had my old collection. All I had left at one point was like the first issue of AVP, X-Force #1.
Oh, that is an issue of a comic.
Value. Like, so I was like, I better hold on to this. And then like that Punisher run from the '80s that Mike Zeck drew.
Oh yeah,
the 4-issue limited series.
That's right.
I was like, well, these are going to be worth something. And then, like, I'm positive I don't own them anymore. I have no idea where they went. It was just a thing that disappeared. But, so, yeah. But once they gave me AVP, they were just like, well, we just want you to do, like, a crazy-ass monster movie. And I was like, well, that's great.
I can do that.
Yeah. And I can at least, like, try to avoid the pitfalls of where those movies always go wrong, which is, like, focusing on dumb humans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's very true.
It's absolutely true. Unless one of those dumb humans proves themselves among the predators and then go... I'm getting in there again.
Just like Danny Glover did.
Just like Danny Glover did in Predator 2. Clearly he flew off with the predators at the end of that movie.
Oh, I wish. So great.
And then you've then ended up working on another movie franchise book with Escape from New York.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
I think it was basically because I had started doing a creator-owned book at Boom called Dead Letters.
Oh yeah, well, we should talk about Dead Letters maybe then. Was that sort of the next?
Yeah, I'm trying to. Yeah, I guess Dead Letters was. I don't know. That it all becomes a jumble now. Like in what order? I think it was. I was working on AVP and Ghost kind of right after. That was like the next big thing I had after High Crimes had started coming out, and then like yeah, I don't know. Dead Letters is somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that was a creator-owned book that like I pitched to Boom like. And they went for
kind of in the crime genre as well.
Yeah, but very much
a little more high concept.
A little more high concept, a little more ethereal, like a little sort of like. And the reason was because when I pitched to Boom, I had lunch with Bryce Carlson, the managing editor, and he was like, I told him some ideas, and he was like, "That's great. Like, can you just He's like, when you get back home, can you just like write them up as paragraphs and send them to me?" I was like, yeah, sure. So I got home and like checked every one of the ones I had already, like the 12-issue maxi series and all those. Like I was like, okay, love these. And then I ran across a half-built idea I had that was like Red Harvest set in Purgatory, and I was like, I'll just throw that on there. Like maybe they'll like it. And of course, like that was the one. And literally, like, everything that was in there was, like, some stuff I had established before, but most of it I just kind of, like, made up on the fly. I was like, oh, and it'll be this and this. And and then, of course, they were like, this is the one we love. Like, oh, shit. Man. I was like, well, you guys are going to have to help me then, because I sort of know it, but it wasn't one of those books where, like, High Crimes, when I pitched it, I knew exactly how it's going to end. Mm-hmm. Dead Letters, I was just like, I know how it starts, sort of.
Yeah, the first issue of that book really grabbed me because so much of it is just like, what's happening for all of it really until like and then you're like,
yeah,
oh,
which I think is what sunk us. Like, I mean, but we had a good run of 12 issues, but I think. Yeah, we consciously made the choice of like we're not going to make the reveal until or I consciously made that choice, and then marketing was like we're going to try and keep it a secret, which we did. I think we did it a little too well because then everybody was just like, "Oh, it's just some crime book."
I mean, I picked it up having absolutely no idea what it was.
Yeah, so I think like that might have worked against us. I don't know, but it was that was a direct descendant of me buying that bookshelf and filling it with crime books. It was just like that's what I want to do. Like, One Man Plays All Sides Against the Middle, and like Chester Himes novels, and it was just like everything I loved about like old World War II crime stuff and Prohibition crime stuff. And it was just like I'm just going to do my take on it, and I'll set it in Purgatory so we can kind of do whatever we want. Really.
Right. Yeah, very cool. So that led you to Escape from New York?
Yeah, I think everybody at Boom liked Dead Letters and the character stuff I was doing. So, I got an email about it, and they're just like, "Hey, we have this thing that you might be interested. We know you were looking for some more work." They're like, "Is that still the case?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then I got the follow-up email, which was like, well, we'd like to ask if you'd like to write Escape from New York. And I like never hit reply so fast. Like, yeah, I will do that.
I take it you were a fan of the film?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, John Carpenter is sort of one of those all-time directors for me.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I grew up on, like, he sort of taught me what horror movies were. So, and I remember because Big Trouble in Little China had started coming out. Mm-hmm. My buddy Brian Chirillo was drawing that. So when I met with my editors, I was like, if you get another John Carpenter book and you don't let me pitch for it, like, I'm never writing for you guys again. Like, emptiest threat of all time. But apparently it's stuck in their heads because, then they asked me if I wanted to do it. And I was like, well, yeah. And, it's been, I mean, we're wrapping up now, so it's going to issue 16. So that's my longest run in comics so far.
Oh, cool.
Which is pretty weird.
I mean, how do you begin to approach something like that? I mean, is there, similar to the Fox thing, is there anybody going like, "Oh, this is not Escape from New York"?
The studio that owns Escape from New York, like we had to run everything by them, and at least like the first arc we ran by Carpenter.
Oh, interesting. Did you get to interact with Carpenter at all?
No, sadly. Like I think because at that point, I think he was very hands on with Big Trouble in Little China because it was like the first time that was happening to one of his properties, and that they invited him in. And
So second time he was just like, oh, another comic book.
I think it was just like, it might have been that, or it might have just been like, oh, well, that first one went well enough. Like I guess I trust them enough to not screw it up.
Let's hope it was that one.
Yeah. But he read my first script, I know, like, because I got a note from my editor that was like, yeah, Carpenter likes your script. Like, and I was like, okay, well, that's big. Like, I still have the email printed out, and it's in the back of my notebook for Escape from New York. But yeah, otherwise, it was just like running stuff by the studio, and they would occasionally, like, the biggest note they ever gave was before I started writing it, they wanted the first issue to start right at the end of the movie. And I was like, great, I don't have to write a first page now. Like, I would have sat and stewed over that for forever, and they were just like, yeah, start it at the end of the movie. I was like, okay. Then, and then, yeah, it was just more like, I don't know, it was just, because I'm a big fan of Escape from New York. I even really like Escape from L.A.
I think Escape from LA gets a bad rap. I know people.
I think it does. I mean, there's definitely a lot that's cheesy about
sure,
it.
yeah.
But, yeah, so I just wanted to do something that, like, would not offend me as a fan.
You've definitely expanded the world quite a bit in that book.
I mean, and that was the thing, was, like, my operating premise was, like, if this is a future that's so screwed up that, like, government was just like, we don't need New York City anymore. Like, let's just wall it off and make it a prison. Like, how screwed up must the rest of not only America be, but the entire world? So, and then, my immediate impulse was like Florida. Like I could put Snake Plissken in Florida today, and it would be like equally fraught with danger. But like, what is Florida, in this alternate universe like? And then from there, like, it was. Then I became very attached to, like, sort of making this big, long story. So, like, you can sort of take each arc on its own, but each arc leads into the next. And I think, like, once somebody picks up all 4 volumes, like, that'll be a very satisfying sort of thing. Doing it week by week or, month by month is... I mean, it's an action movie, so I think, like, it's like asking somebody, like, here, just watch 40 minutes of this action movie. We'll show you the next 40 in a month.
Does the punch connect?
Who knows? And so you said you're wrapping that up. So that's coming to there's an end to your.
Yeah, there's 2 more issues left.
Okay, very cool. And then you're working on some new stuff now.
Right now I've got Welcome Back is coming out.
That's right.
Boom.
Yeah.
That's sort of the big. I mean, I think that's my biggest book to debut. Like, the first issue went to a 3rd printing, and the second issue went to a 2nd printing, which I was like, oh, okay. Like, I don't understand any of this. Like, and yeah, like, I think the reactions by and large have been really, really good. And yeah, that was initially just approved for 4 issues, and then they gave us another 4. That remains to be seen if we're getting another 4 after that. But I just got the trades like right before I came here.
So very cool.
That was nice. Those are out next week.
Awesome.
Cool.
So I've got that. What else? I'm doing a book for Stila, which is a new.
Who was just talking about them?
Ibrahim.
Oh, yeah.
He's
It's
doing a
the
book for them,
continuous
too.
read mobile app, yeah?
Yeah, it's basically like a sort of Netflix model of comics, but it's all original creator-owned books to be read on your phone, and I think iPads. I mean, I'm sure the resolution's high enough, but yeah, I'm doing a book there with Jonathan Brandon Sawyer, who is the original artist on Welcome Back, and we're doing like a sort of our version of Thelma and Louise.
Oh, very
but
cool.
different.
Cool.
So yeah, I just got he just uploaded like the first chapter of Inks today, and it looks really, really good. I'll show you guys when we're not on the air.
Oh yeah, very cool.
Visuals great for the podcast.
Oh, just
I
lots
wish you
of.
could see this. I wish you could.
Oh, ooh, yeah, that's nice.
I've never seen that done before.
That has happened a few times on the show. Look at this page. Or like, you have with Ibrahim when he showed us that Mariel Hemingway from Superman 4 is in High Crimes.
He's very proud of that.
It's pretty awesome.
Yep. Well, he came on specifically to talk about Superman 4. He came on our show. So,
Yeah, that was. I remember him pointing that out to me. I'm just being like, "You're the only one who's ever going to get that. Like, nobody's going to be reading this book and go like, hey, that looks like Superman 4. Like, you were alone on this island."
he's still out there on that. And then, I mean, are there things you still would you want to do more like stuff for Marvel or DC, or would you want to play in those sandboxes?
Yeah, I'm.
Any people in particular? Any characters you want to pick apart or add to? Or
I don't know. I mean, you can edit this out maybe if I change my mind or something, right?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I'm doing this. I'm in the DC development group right now,
Oh, interesting.
which Scott Snyder is teaching.
Ooh.
So it's me and like 12 other writers, and we Skype in at like my next class is tomorrow. So
Oh, cool.
Fun.
So yeah, like it's as close as I've gotten to like the big two sort of expressing an interest in me. Like all the Marvel stuff I did before, it was like Matt and Kel could have brought anybody in that was like marginally qualified, and as long as they vouched for them, I think it would have gone okay. But yeah, so I'm having to confront a lot of those. Like, well, who would you write if? Because one of the things we have to write like scripts for the class of like if you were write in issue 1 of any character that you want to write. So
Cool.
That's an interesting thought experiment just by itself. Like from
Yeah.
a writer's standpoint, just like, okay, you're given the sandbox, pick a character, like write a script, go. That's like I wouldn't even know how to start approaching that.
It's been difficult. Yeah, like my script is due on Friday, and I'm 1/4 of the way through it. And even now, I'm like, what if I picked a different character? Like,
That's why you picked the Justice League, and then you got them all.
yeah, that was the thing. It was like I can't do any team stuff. Like,
Well, no, because that's cheating. I'll do the Suicide Squad or whatever,
I just don't know how to do that. Like, that's just so intimidating to have, like, all right, not only are you writing, like, a chair character, you're writing 7 chair characters. Like,
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Try not to screw it up. And try to give everybody the requisite amount of room.
That's why you got to fill it with like C-list DC characters. This is whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is my Justice League, and Captain Boomerang's on it.
oh yeah,
It's
Well,
the
Digger
It's
Harkness
the
is
question.
every-
Hawk and Dove.
Yeah.
yep.
Nobody's going to carry you screw except for Dan Scotty will care if you screw up the question. But
Fair enough.
But yeah, like, I don't know. Like, definitely Doom Patrol is on my list.
oh,
but,
very cool. Yeah.
If I was ever asked to write Doom Patrol, I think I would just curl up and into a ball, and like I wouldn't know how to function. Like Grant Morrison's run on Doom Patrol is like top 3 books of all time for me.
I mean, that's iconic. Obviously, that's the first thing I think of when anybody says Doom Patrol.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing that like really, that's the first time. I think that's like when I went back to reading comics when my buddy was living with me. It was right after he moved out, and I remember I went to visit him in North Carolina, and we went to Heroes actually, and I remember picking up just like a handful of random Doom Patrol issues out of the box, and the first one I read was an issue where Mansoor Masala, who's a giant sentient gorilla, wears a beret.
Awesome.
It was him and I can't remember the Brain's name's character, but it's basically just a brain in a jar.
Oh yeah, it's that mad scientist guy. Yeah, I'm blanking on that.
I think he's just called the Brain.
He was in a couple of episodes of Young Justice as well. Like when they pulled that out, I was just like, "Wow, this is some deep cuts for a kids show."
And it's just them like breaking into the Doom Patrol's headquarters and stealing Robot Man's body, and then at the end, they finally confess their love for one another. I was like, "What the hell?" Like I read it in a weird motel room in North Carolina, and I was like, "This is like, I don't know what this is, but I need more of it. But it's like, yeah, something that I mean, it'd be like trying to write Batman. Like, oh, Scott Snyder's done with Batman. Here, we want you to come. It's like, what do I do? Like,
that's always the thing. Like, I mean, I feel like, I know these characters. I think I could write their voices, but as for what they're doing, I don't know, because there's 80 years of Batman stories. How do you,
How do you decide if what I don't know?
Step one: bring back Crazy Quilt.
Always bring back Crazy Quilt. And Kevin Smith did.
I know.
Yeah, it was very very interesting. Always when I'm always fascinated by people's because it seems like there are a lot of people who are like, well, I wouldn't want to work for them at all, or they're very
I totally but that's what I grew up reading.
Yeah, exactly.
Why wouldn't I want to at least like maybe I go do it and I'm like, this isn't for me. Like, but I'm not gonna I don't even want the opportunity. Like, I don't want to know what that's like.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like people who say that are like, who are like instantly are like, I'm not interested in Marvel or DC, are basically saying like, I might enjoy it too much.
Yeah.
And definitely, I mean, I feel like there's some room for heartbreak there. Like, anytime you're playing with other people's toys, they can take them back at any moment. So
sure, but I mean, you also look at things like what Matt and Kelly Sue were able to do at Marvel. I mean, they really, those were their books, even though they were Marvel's books. It was like, I mean, that's Fractions Hawkeye, So I mean, I think a lot of you're seeing a lot. It seems like they're more willing to let a lot of these indie kind of people come in and mess around a bit more, at least when it's Hawkeye.
Or I mean, like Tom King's Vision book,
amazing book now.
There's no way that book would have happened until the last 10 years. So, I mean, I feel like the opportunity to sort of do goofier stuff or take an approach that's not the sort of formula that the tried and true formula. That stuff excites me. Is like, how would I write Deadman if somebody asked me to write Deadman?
Oh, yeah.
Or how would I do, Suicide Squad, like, even with a movie coming out and, them showing up on The Flash or whatever, like what would my take be? I mean, that's what you're doing when you're writing your own stuff, is basically like, well, how would I do this? Like, if they give you the freedom to, like, okay, you can ignore canon and you don't have to know that, like, this person went into space 40 issues ago, that they're still recovering from that. Like, and they're just like, no, here's a character. You already know plenty about him. Just go to town, and, like, if we like it, then we'll do some. And if we don't, then, I mean, all you've really lost is some time daydreaming about superheroes, which you probably would do at some point anyway.
Yeah.
Why do you think we started a podcast?
Exactly. Do you guys have anything else specifically for?
I'm mostly just curious about like your writing process in general, because I mean it's different for everybody.
Sure.
Like you're talking about like long nights at coffee shops, and like God knows I've had plenty of those. But like, do you start with that kernel of an idea and do you just start writing from there, or do you like take the time to like beat by beat outline stuff as well?
I try to page by page outline for every issue I do. I mean, but initially, like, I'll get an idea and then I'll make a note of it in just like sort of a catch-all notebook, and then kind of walk away from it. Or like, if it's an idea that I can I don't know. I have this like weird vetting process in my head. It's almost like hazing or something. It's like, it's a pretty good idea. I'm gonna like ignore you for a long time, and if you still stick around, then you're probably worth exploring further. I mean, it all depends. I don't know. I mean, there are ideas that I'm still trying to crack, and then there are ones that just like the moment I think of it, it's like, oh, and then this happens. Like,
yeah,
it's just I think just some things I can easily, and I don't understand why. Like, some projects I can easily find my way into, and others are just like, no, I'm just gonna have to like stare at my notebook for a couple hours to figure it out.
Pound my head against the nut until it cracks.
Yeah, and I'm very big with procrastination. I like to put stuff off to the last minute. Like, so, if my deadline is on a Monday, then usually like Sunday night at around 11, you can find me at a coffee shop, like just starting on page 3. So, that's how I've always worked. Sadly, it worked really well for me in my academic career. Of just like put it off for the last minute, and then just like bust out a masterpiece.
Take the term deadline seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I think like the stuff that I like writing best is like, I don't know. I just do a lot of sort of thinking about it unconsciously. Like you're just sort of like, I think if you think about an issue enough or a book enough, that when you actually sit down to write it, it's like, oh, I've basically been kind of writing it in my head. Like I haven't been breaking it down, but I know like everything I want to do.
Right.
It's really frustrating though, like because some, you know, like I have this thing I call fugue writing, which is like some nights, and it's almost always at the coffee shop. Like I will go to the coffee shop, lock in, start writing, and then, you know, it's like 2 hours later and I've written 10 pages.
I've definitely had similar nights where it's just like you look up and like 3 hours have passed. It's like, I don't quite remember what I've written, but there's a lot of pages in front of me, so that's nice.
Yeah, and it feels good, and it's just like, why can't I like do this every time?
Right.
It's like, no, you have to sit through now you have to sit through 4 sessions of like staring frustratedly at your computer and then just like reloading Twitter over so
that's why I turned off the internet on my laptop.
Yeah. See, the one failing I think about those programs is that it requires me to push the button.
Right.
And like that's where it fails. Like it'll always fail on that front because like I'm like, well, what if I have to look something up?
Wikipedia needs to be available.
Yeah, so I don't know. Somebody asked me to describe my process in one word, and my response was inertia.
Fair enough.
It's just like I don't know. Yeah, I just kind of dick around until it feels like it's the right time to work, and then I seriously sit down to work. But like during the day, I'll do a lot of just goofing off and sort of catching up on admin stuff, and then just writing is just like. And I don't require like a quiet place, and I don't need I go to the coffee shop and I sit outside. So one, it's freezing cold, especially like right now. Even with the heating lamps, like it's freezing cold. Like I would get up some nights and it's like, oh, I can barely feel my legs. Like I must have gotten a lot of work done. But there's tons of people there, and they're all just chatting about the dumbest, most inane things possible, and that really works for me for some reason. Like, I don't know why. It's like rage writing. I don't know. Yeah. So like, I'll just go and like hear somebody being stupid and be like, nope, I have to tune this out. And the way I tune it out is like I have to start writing. Like, so
stupidity leads you to focusing away from the stupidity onto the writing.
But I'm like, I can't work in silence at all. Like, I rented studio space for a little bit, and I couldn't go during the day because everybody was chatting with each other, and it wasn't like strangers chatting. These were people I knew. So then it's like, well, I can't think of them as idiots. They might be talking about idiotic shit, but then I would go at night. Nobody would be there, and I was like, it's so quiet. Like, I can't do this. Like, so yeah, I need to be like in a place where other people are who do not give a shit that I am writing something, like could care less, and a lot of caffeine and a really tight deadline. I think those are like my 3 key tools to writing.
Fair enough.
And I'm sure, I'm trying to move away from it because it's just like, I should be able to do this without like, because I live in southeast Portland and I drive out to Beaverton like once, twice, maybe 4 times a week to work all night. So that's like 40 minutes in the car that I could be working or taking a nap. So
I do not recommend taking a nap in a car. I've done that once. It didn't end well.
While it's moving.
Yeah, no, while it's moving particularly, yeah.
And you were behind the wheel, yeah.
Look, that 35 mile an hour sign got taught a lesson. That's all I'm saying.
Cool. So we're going to turn now to a segment we do whenever we have a guest, which is when we hand things over to something called Weird Questions with Donovan Eilert. So, Donovan, you want to throw some weird questions
I
at
have
Chris here?
a few very simple questions today. Which movie improves most with a reverse watching? Like watching the movie in reverse.
That's a great. Can we come back to that?
Sure.
I feel like the only answer is just not Memento.
Memento, yeah, I think.
Well, my impulse is like because I've read enough of the is to say like Jaws because it's a lot of shark who rises from the dead.
Oh yeah, was it awesome? Okay, we can come back to that if you need an extra moment.
I'll think about it while we're talking about other stuff.
Who's your favorite Muppet?
I guess. It's Statler and Waldorf.
Oh yeah,
They count as one.
yeah,
They definitely
the
do.
hecklers. Yeah,
What's one without the other, for sure, yeah.
They're definitely the ones I feel most close to spiritually. If the Muppet Show were real and I had to be a part of it, I would definitely be the dude like up in the box, just like what a bunch of assholes.
yeah, those guys are awesome.
Could be worse. We could be hosting a podcast.
That's right. What was soap really invented for originally?
Oh, my God. There it is. That's the weirdest one.
Is there a right answer?
I think you know it.
I feel like I've walked into a trap.
No trap. Whatever you say, we'll take as
just historical fact.
historical fact.
All I know about soap is what I learned in Fight Club. Like,
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
am I getting close then?
Sure. Yeah.
Soap was an accident. Soap was not created; it was just discovered.
Okay. Cool.
Deep within the soap mines.
It was just waiting for the right time to be born.
All right.
So it has no purpose. It just
We just brought it into our homes. It's kind of like cats. Kind of like same kind of thing.
or bonsai plants.
Yeah, exactly. I might as well bring it inside. It's pretty cute.
Yeah,
Whatever.
I'll just rub this against my body. So
Yeah.
it's all a mistake.
Yeah. Cool. Besides Joss, did you have another? Those were the three I had. So for movie universe, I do like the idea of a shark vomiting
Oh, yeah.
humans up,
Yeah.
kind of like owl style, like human pellets.
Yeah.
It's kind of like.
You know, sharks are just the owls of the sea.
Yeah.
True. That's what they're called.
Yeah, that's right.
Also doubles as a marine biology podcast.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe Up.
Oh yeah. About a man. That's kind
Man
of
who lives on a weird deserted island with a small boy. And meets a bunch of dogs, and then he gets in his house and floats back to a city.
kind of to safety.
Yeah, and then meets an old lady as she returns to life.
Cool.
Ostensibly, they live until they're very young and die.
All right.
Back to Benjamin Button, kind of.
Yeah.
I
The very Benjamin Button.
I like to hit those callbacks.
Yeah. Cool. I think both of those are excellent answers. And both one-word titles. Jaws and Up. Maybe we're finding a theme here. What are other one-word movie titles?
All right, no.
Drive?
There we go.
Where he puts a man's head back together.
With just his foot. We end every episode with our recommendation segment where we recommend comics we think you should be reading. We always like to start with our guests. Chris, do you have any comics that you think people should be checking out?
Trying to think. I mean, other than the ones you're probably all familiar with, I'd say like I really like The Violent.
Oh yeah, I don't
Pretty
think
much
we brought that up on here actually.
Anything Ed Brisson writes, like I really like Ed as a person, and I think like he's definitely like he likes crime the way I like crime, and he also likes horror the way I like horror. So like it's like this could not be more in my wheelhouse. That or Nailbiter, which is
Nailbiter's a great book.
another thing where like I'm still mad at Josh for like coming up with that idea.
It is an amazing idea.
And I remember, like we used to have this thing we called the Pitch and Bitch, like back in 2011. And I remember Josh talking about Nailbiter back then, and even back then being like, "You ass, I love that idea." Like, I hope this never gets published, and then maybe you get hit by a bus. No one will ever know.
Those are, all the time I see stuff or read stuff, and I'm just like, damn. Why didn't I do angry that I didn't create that, which is totally irrational, but that's how I feel still.
It's a form of flattery.
Yeah, it's one of the
I wish
highest
you would
compliments
die and people wouldn't remember that you wrote this, so I could take credit for it.
If I had a 30th use of a time machine, it would go back to ensure that you were never born, so I could steal all your shit.
Well, the secret to that is if you write Doctor Who, you get access to a TARDIS. We've discovered this early on in the show.
Theory.
So if you see if you can start writing Doctor Who.
I can't. I've never when I was in grade school, our history teacher, he used to do this thing after class where he's like, "If you want to come watch Doctor Who, I'll be playing it with and he'd wheel in the TV on the big
Oh,
part.
cool.
This was nobody Doctor Who was a thing that was on PBS and only nerds cared about. So I remember watching some, and even back then being like, "This is kind of junky. I don't care about this."
Depending on which Doctor Who is showing, you're absolutely correct.
I just remember there was a Minotaur in one of them. But
It could be any of the Doctors.
Yeah.
back then, I was just like, "This looks terrible. What are they shooting this on?" That was the first.
It's like
time
a
I
black box
understood-
theater production for the most part. Those old
I
ones.
understood what video and film were back then, and I was like, I don't like things that are shot on video. So
Yeah.
people have told me no, new Doctor Who's good, and I'm just like, I've got actual shows that I care about.
Well, then I hate to break it to you, you'll never have written Nailbiter.
Oh well,
That's the price you pay for not liking Doctor
that's
Who.
fair.
So
But on the upside, my friend Josh gets to live.
sure, sure.
That's true. Yeah, pros and cons.
Yeah.
Donovan, what do you got for recommendations?
Cool.
this week?
I've been reading through a series that started in 2010. It's they kind of started renumbering Black Widow. It's by Marjorie Liu. It's really awesome. The first issue, somebody knocks out and surgically removes something from Natasha, and then there's a little bit of a
Something?
there's that may be part of the story of trying to figure that out. And
Fair enough.
and it's her. It's during the time where she's dating Bucky Cap, and
Bucky Cap, yep.
kind of Bucky Cap, Wolverine, and Tony Stark are kind of also three guys trying to put her life back together and figure out what side she's on and what's going on and why. So
Sounds really cool.
It's pretty awesome. Yeah, I've been really enjoying it. From what I can tell, there's several pencilers that kind of move through and work on that book. So I could give shout outs, but it could also go for a long time. So it's super cool. Just check out like you said, the Marjorie Liu
Black Widow
run. It's cool.
Nice. Very cool. Grigoni?
I've talked about a series on here before called Avengers Arena. That's where a bunch of younger characters from the Marvel Universe got thrown on an island by the classic villain Arcade, and then were forced to fight to the death like Hunger Games style. Cool. I've already recommended that. The sequel series to that, written by the same guy, Dennis Hopeless, is called Avengers Undercover, and it deals with the survivors of that event, because that event did not end well for most of the people involved. Sure. And those left over are pretty messed up by the experience. And so now they're they're not hanging out together. They're kind of forced to hang out together when they're given the opportunity to murder Arcade for what he put them through. And they kind of, let's say, grab life by the horns where that's concerned, and then the story progresses from there as they're given this opportunity by none other than, I believe it's not Strucker. It's who's the other Hydra guy that's not Red Skull? Zemo.
Zemo.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yes, of
Zemo.
course.
The one with the weird fluffy mask.
Or cool fluffy mask.
It looks like he has a turtleneck all the way over his head.
Sometimes it's what's required.
Zemo always said turtlenecks didn't go far enough.
Wow.
Something must be done.
But yeah, it's a super intense book. It follows these young characters as they're kind of winding their way into this society of ostensibly supervillains, and trying to be led astray mostly by Zemo and others around him. It's a really good book. Again, story was by Dennis Hopeless. The art kind of switches back and forth between Kevin Walker and Timothy Green II, though there's a couple of fill-in artists here and there as well. Cool. But yeah, highly recommend Avengers Undercover.
Cool. My recommendation this week is one of my favorite books that's currently out there, which is The Sheriff of Babylon by Tom King and Mitch Gerards, which is it's a noir kind of detective story, but in the middle of the Iraq War. And it follows this military...
First or second Iraq War?
The second.
Okay.
Yeah. Not the Gulf War.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Follow this military investigator and an Iraqi detective as they sort of investigate a murder, and then you've got all kinds of swirling terrorist cells, and I mean, obviously the trickiness of trying to investigate a crime in the middle
political
of
quagmire that is the Middle East.
Exactly, and man, it's a fantastic book, beautifully drawn, and whether there are about 3 issues in, I think, on it currently. It's edited by a friend of the show, Jamie S. Rich.
Nice.
It's a Vertigo book, and it's great if people are looking for a sort of different take on the crime or detective kind of book, Sheriff of Babylon.
Sweet.
Yeah. Cool. So obviously we want to thank Chris for coming on the show. Do you have any kind of web presence you want to plug or anything?
Yeah. My website is ChristopherSebela.com. It's not very useful, though, but it's pretty.
It is a really
pretty,
nice-looking
yeah.
site, actually. Yeah.
But I'd say the best way to, like, I'm on Twitter at xtop. That's sort of where I make my internet bones. So
Very cool.
that's my lifeline when I'm sitting in a quiet room by myself, like on hour 4. It's like, please, somebody talk to me. So if you want to talk to me, that's probably the best place. And then, I kind of just limit it to that, I think.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. Of course, you can find us on Twitter. We're at Panel on Panels. We're also on Facebook and
Instagram.
Instagram.
Those
That's
are
the
big
other
ones.
one.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm on that too.
You're on the Instagram?
Yep.
All right. Very cool.
Yep. I'm pretty cool.
If you want to send us long-winded diatribes about things, you can email us at panelonpanels@gmail.com. I don't know why I said diatribes, but, I enjoy a good diatribe now and then.
Send your diatribes, your rants, your whatever to the
Your
email.
short films, whatever.
Yeah.
Send us stuff.
Sure, yeah, why not?
Thanks. Let's maybe not ask for those, but
Hey, if that's what it's going to take, if somebody's like, I want to talk to these guys, but I really think they need to see my short film to understand me, all right.
before you read what I have to say, watch this film.
Yeah.
It's only 35 minutes.
That's right.
And of course, as always, please rate and review us on iTunes and or Stitcher. I know people also use
Any
that.
place you can rate and or review podcasts, it would be appreciated.
Yeah, very much so. That's awesome. So I think that's going to do it for this episode. For Panel on Panels, I've been John Campbell.
I am currently Mike Gergoni.
And I will always be Donovan Eilert.
Keep reading comics, everybody.